Horizontal asymptotes are going to be a little bit different. Horizontal asymptotes, now instead of the y values going off to positive or negative infinity, it's the x values that are. So we're looking in terms of a graph, what's happening way off to the right or way off to the left. Uh, and the interesting aspect of this is that a horizontal asymptote is allowed to be crossed by a graph. Vertical asymptotes cannot be touched by our graph, but horizontal asymptotes are allowed because of the fact that we don't care what's happening near the origin. We care about, what's our function approaching way off to one side or the other. Uh, and there are several ways we approach this, kind of in its most basic. If we look at the function 1 over x, I do have to check both directions. So if I look at going to the left, that says x is going towards negative infinity. Well, if I think in terms of what's happening to my function as x goes to negative infinity, I would have like 1 over negative 10, 1 over negative 100, 1 over negative a million, 1 over negative 10 trillion. I get numbers that are always negative, but they're getting closer and closer to 0. And so this is going to be 0 for the limit. That means I have a horizontal asymptote at y equals 0 as I go towards the left. So in terms of my function's graph, as I'm going to the left, it has to be negative, but getting closer and closer to 0. I also have to look at what's happening as I go to the right. Well, as I go to the right, x is going to positive infinity. And so I'm looking at my limit as x goes to positive infinity of the function 1 over x. Well, those are going to be things like 1 over 10, 1 over 100, 1 over a million, 1 over 10 trillion. They're always going to be positive, but they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and those values are approaching 0. So I also have a horizontal asymptote of y equals 0 as I'm approaching infinity on the right. So the horizontal asymptotes are always going to be equal to whatever this limit is equal to. So when I do the limit as x goes to negative infinity, if that equals a value, there's a horizontal asymptote, y equals that value. I also do a limit as x goes to positive infinity. If it equals a value, I have a horizontal asymptote in that direction at y equals that value. And I can even extend this to functions like x squared. We know this does not have a horizontal asymptote because we know this is a parabola, the ends go up forever, but it doesn't hurt to just verify that as I go left, my limit as x goes to negative infinity of the x squared, well, I've got negative 10 squared, which is 100, negative a million squared, which is positive 10 to the 12th. They're getting bigger and bigger. These are going off to infinity. So because my limit doesn't equal value, there is no horizontal asymptote to the left. As I go to the right, my limit as x approaches positive infinity of x squared, well, it's 10 squared, a million squared, 10 trillion squared. These are going off to positive infinity also. So because my limit doesn't equal a value to the right, there is no horizontal asymptote.